You wake up with a fever. You take something for it, sleep, and move on. You cut your hand badly. You clean the wound, put something on it, and it heals. These are things so ordinary that you probably don't think about them at all. Now imagine the same two situations. Same fever, same wound, but no medicine, no pharmacy, no doctor, no hospital, no antibiotics, no clean water you can just turn on from a tap. And the year is 40,000 BC. What happens? Most people assume the answer is simple. You die. That ancient humans were one snapped ankle or infected tooth away from the end. That sickness was something that just happened to you, and the only real response was to wait and hope the spirits were feeling generous that week. Here's the thing. The evidence tells a completely different story. Ancient humans, not just thousands of years ago, but tens of thousands of years ago, had a working, sophisticated, practical approach to illness and injury. Not magic, not ritual, though that existed too. An actual systematic body of knowledge built over hundreds of thousands of years of trial, error, careful observation, and a level of plant expertise that took modern scientists decades to even begin to understand. Today we're going through what that actually looked like. Let's start with the most common problem, pain. When you have a headache, inflammation, or a fever, you might reach for aspirin. Aspirin is one of the most widely used drugs in human history. Its active compound, salicylic acid, was first synthesized in a laboratory in the 1800s. But here's what the history books don't always lead with. Salicylic acid comes from willow bark, and humans were chewing willow bark to reduce pain and fever for at least 5,000 years before anyone in a laboratory isolated why it worked. The Sumerians wrote about it. The Egyptians described it in medical papyri dating to 1500 BC. Hippocrates recommended it in ancient Greece. And before any of them, people in every part of the world where willow trees grew were doing the same thing. Not because of chemistry lessons, but because at some point, someone tried it. It helped, and that knowledge was passed on. This is the fundamental thing to understand about ancient medicine. It worked on observation, not theory. You don't need to know about salicin to notice that chewing this particular bark makes the throbbing in your head quieter, and willow bark was just one example. Archaeological evidence has confirmed the use of hundreds of plant-based remedies across prehistoric cultures. Ephedra as a stimulant and decongestant, turmeric as an anti-inflammatory. Plants containing natural antibacterial compounds used on infected wounds, psychoactive plants used as anesthetics for procedures that would otherwise be unimaginable without them. The more deeply researchers have studied the plant knowledge of ancient and indigenous cultures, the more they've found that this wasn't folk guesswork. It was a sophisticated pharmacopoeia built over tens of thousands of years of accumulated human experience. Passed down orally, refined over generations, and often far more effective than its absence of branding might suggest. Some of it even made it into your medicine cabinet. Literally. In 1991, hikers crossing a melting glacier in the Italian Alps stumbled across a body protruding from the ice. The body was 5,300 years old. He's known as Ötzi the Iceman, and he is the best preserved prehistoric human ever found. Ötzi is remarkable for a lot of reasons, but for the purposes of this video, the most important thing about him is what he was carrying when he died. Researchers found, attached to his leather clothing and in his possession, 2 lumps of a fungus called birch polypore. At first, this seemed like a food item, but when scientists studied his remains in detail, they found something striking. Ötzi was infected with intestinal parasites, a species of whipworm that would have caused significant pain, diarrhea, and anemia. And birch polypore? It contains compounds that are toxic to exactly that parasite. He was carrying his medicine. He knew what was wrong with him, or at least what was hurting, and he knew what to take for it. But wait, Ötzi had other problems too. Analysis revealed he had Lyme disease, hardened arteries, joint inflammation, and evidence of multiple old injuries. He was also covered in 61 tattoos, mostly not on visible parts of the body, but clustered over joints and areas of his spine that showed clear signs of arthritis. Many of those tattoo locations correspond closely to traditional acupuncture points. The current leading hypothesis among researchers is that Ötzi's tattoos weren't decorative. They were therapeutic, a form of localized pain management applied to exactly the places that hurt. This is not a primitive person muddling through. This is someone with a documented medical history, carrying a curated kit of remedies with a body that bears the marks of an active, ongoing attempt to manage chronic pain across a lifetime. He was his own doctor, a pretty well-informed one. Now for the part of this story that genuinely surprised the scientific community when it came to light. In 2022, researchers published findings from Liang Tebo Cave in Borneo, Indonesia, a site already known for containing some of the earliest rock art in the world. In the cave, they found a grave. Inside the grave, the skeleton of a young person estimated to have died between 19 and 20 years old. What the skeleton was missing was immediately obvious: the lower left leg, gone from the mid-shin downward. This was not an animal attack. This was not a crush injury. The bone had been cut, deliberately and precisely in a way that only a sharp tool held by a skilled hand could produce. The person had their left foot and lower leg surgically amputated, probably when they were a child, and then they survived. The bone showed clear evidence of healing, of new tissue growing over the cut edge over years. The individual lived for at least 6 to 9 more years after the procedure, growing into early adulthood. The site is in a tropical rainforest, an environment where wound infections happen extremely fast and extremely aggressively. One of the study's co-authors, who had cut her own finger during fieldwork in the region, noted that she had to rush to get antibiotics within hours to prevent it becoming serious. This child survived a major amputation in a tropical rainforest 31,000 years ago. That requires 3 things: surgical skill, the ability to cut through muscle, blood vessels, and bone cleanly enough to avoid catastrophic bleeding. Antiseptic knowledge, some way to keep the wound from becoming infected in one of the most biologically hostile environments on Earth, likely using plant compounds from Borneo's extraordinarily rich rainforest. And ongoing care, weeks, possibly months of someone tending to this child's recovery. The same dynamic we saw with Shanidar 1, the disabled Neanderthal kept alive by his community, appears here again 31,000 years later in a completely different part of the world. A society that did not abandon its injured members. A society that had the knowledge, the skill, and the willingness to save someone who could not save themselves. This predates the previous oldest confirmed surgical amputation by more than 24,000 years. There is one prehistoric medical procedure that, when people hear about it for the first time, tends to produce a very specific facial expression. It's called trepanation, and it involves drilling a hole in someone's living skull. Evidence of trepanation, the deliberate, careful removal of a disc of skull bone, has been found on every inhabited continent, in populations spanning from ancient Peru to Neolithic Europe to Bronze Age Ukraine. It is, by some measures, the oldest consistently documented surgical procedure in the world. The oldest confirmed examples are over 9,000 years old. And here is the part that matters. In a large percentage of cases, the bone shows signs of healing. The person didn't just survive the drilling. They survived it, recovered from it, and lived on. Why would you drill a hole in someone's head? The best current hypothesis is a combination of reasons depending on the case, treating skull fractures and relieving pressure from head injuries being the most medically logical. But trepanation was also performed for what appear to be neurological symptoms. Behaviors that ancient people may have interpreted as supernatural, but which we might now recognize as epilepsy, severe migraines, or psychological illness. Did it help? Sometimes? Probably yes, particularly for skull fractures, with bone fragments pressing on the brain. For other conditions, whether it helped or not, it clearly didn't kill them more often than they survived. The precision in the best examples is remarkable. Some skulls show multiple separate trepanations, evidence of repeat procedures on the same patient, which implies not just an operation but a course of treatment. Implies a relationship between healer and patient over time. Here's the big picture. For most of human history, the story we told about prehistoric medicine was that it barely existed, that before written records and formal education and institutions, humans were essentially stumbling through illness on instinct and luck, that sophisticated medical knowledge was a product of civilization. Ötzi and Borneo and the trepanned skulls of Neolithic Europe suggest something different. Medical knowledge didn't begin when civilization did. It accumulated continuously across human history, built through the same mechanism that built everything else ancient humans knew: careful observation, collective memory, and the willingness to keep trying. The specific plants varied by continent. The techniques evolved, but the underlying approach, look for what works, remember it, share it, improve it, appears to be deeply human, far older than any civilization, and far more effective than we gave it credit for. You are taking something developed by ancient humans every time you take aspirin. The dose has been standardized, the compound has been synthesized, but the knowledge that the willow tree holds something useful for pain was figured out, not by Bayer and not by a chemist in the 1800s, but by someone, somewhere, a very long time ago, who was in pain, noticed a tree, and decided to try it. That's not primitive, that's science. Slow, empirical, oral, patient, and ancient. Which brings me to one last thing worth sitting with. Shanidar One, who you met in the last video, the disabled Neanderthal kept alive for years by his group. The person in Borneo cared for after surgery for 6 years until they died at 19. The communities that developed this knowledge and passed it down across generations. None of this was done for strangers. It was done for people who were known, for people who mattered. The oldest medicine was also an act of love. What part of this surprised you most? Let me know in the comments. If you found this worth watching, subscribe. There's more from deep human history coming.